Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Philosophical Jew podcast. I have with me today a very unique voice in the Jewish world. He goes by Rav Mo on social media. His name is Rabbi Moshe Friedman, and he has a very great YouTube channel called Mensch Sense, where I first discovered him, that you should all check out. I will leave the link in the description. Rav Mo, would you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
With pleasure. Thank you for having me on. As you said, my name, the most generic Jewish name in the universe, Moshe Friedman. So when you have a name like that, you have to stand out in some other way. So I grew up in Manhattan, grew up in New York City, to a traditional but not particularly religious family. In university, I took a sharp turn away from even the traditional Judaism that I had. I explored in no particular order atheism, and then Buddhism, and then Indian philosophy, and then I studied a lot of other religions and philosophies throughout my time in university. And the last place that I looked was Judaism for meaning, and lo and behold, I was proverbially sitting on the treasure chest the whole time. And so that led me to a deep inquiry into Jewish ideas, and eventually decided to spend some time studying in Israel, and yada, 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 10 years of studying there, and working for another 7 years in outreach, and here I am. So that's the short version of the story.
Really nice. And I think that you've mentioned, I didn't mention also that besides from Mensch Sense, which is like your YouTube channel for your a menschlichkeit take on social media and secular culture, and secular media in general, like TV shows and movies and Hollywood, secular thinkers. You also stand out with spoken word poetry. How did you get into that? So, if you don't mind me.
So there's lots of threads here. When I was 12, 13 years old, I had a close friend, and the two of us spent a lot of time getting deep into rap music. And at the age of 15, I started writing rap music. When I was 19 in university, I put out a rap album, which no one will ever hear. Thank God that was in the era before everything made its way immortally onto the internet. And when I went to yeshiva and I started studying Jewish ideas, I thought, wow, rap can be a very powerful medium for conveying very deep ideas, because it's, first of all, it's got way more words than the average song, and second of all, the punchline, the structure of a rap song makes it so that you can set up and deliver ideas that are really impactful. So for a long time, I wrote rap music. I've put out a couple of albums of Jewish rap, and when I moved to London about 7 years ago, I started exploring other genres. For various reasons, rap music is a bit expensive to make, and not that, it's a big ordeal. But spoken word poetry, you don't need as much material to be able to do it. So I started transitioning into that type of medium. It was kind of a looser version of rap music. And so I started going off in that direction as well. And so basically, I love to explore any medium, as long as it's a powerful outlet and a good way of conveying beautiful, deep wisdom, then I'm in.
Yeah, that's a really good point about. That's very interesting. From rap music to spoken word, it's sort of like a natural next step, if that's the type of, rhyme and pattern you go by, I guess. I'm very much a fan of NF, who's a rapper, like a secular rapper, and I do try to explain to people that rap can actually be very deep. It's like sort of a foreign concept to a lot of people, but rap to spoken word, there is a way there that that message can come across with just it's a very unique form of conveying a message, and it's very interesting. I listened to some of that. And I'll link it in the description as well. So there's like a theme about everything you do, where you sort of take these interesting avenues to, extract all these very, very profound ideas and reflections on the culture around us. So what initially drew you? You speak about Jordan Peterson, you speak about, Hollywood in general. So what initially drew you to bridge the gap between Orthodox Judaism and the broader cultural conversations?
Well, it's all just an amalgam of my life in general. I'm just trying to pick up the pieces here. I grew up with a veritable library of popular culture, just through my youth. I watched, I can't tell you, I'm not sure I even want to confess to you how many hours of The Simpsons is in my brain. So when you start to spend more of your time studying things that actually matter, and then you go back and you're like, why is it that I can sing to you the entire corpus of children's commercials from 1992 to 1998? Like, I can literally sing to you, the song for a baby doll that wets her pants, like from 1993, like some Mattel, right? I can just, so I look back, and this is a general philosophy that I have, and as somebody who did not grow up as religious and found myself becoming involved in a community that I did not grow up with, is that some people will tend to look back on their lives with regret and say, what a waste of time. I don't think that's true. I think that we are born into a particular environment for a reason. We oftentimes, the way that you can, or at least a clue to what a person is meant to be doing with their life, is to think about all of the areas of their life that they didn't choose. So what was your socioeconomic status, and what type of parents and family did you have, and where did you grow up, and what innate talents do you have, and pool all those things together. And those are hints from God telling you, these are the raw materials that I gave you that I obviously want you to use. So having grown up with all of that knowledge of popular culture, I felt, well, this is a really accessible way to get through to people, because we all share a lot of these stories that we grew up with, and we all can use them as a basis for conversation. So I thought, well, these are incredibly, there's a lot of philosophy that's waiting to be discussed around a lot of these popular media. And so I thought, great, this is the basis for something that we could do here. I began discussing ideas of popular TV shows and movies, did an episode on X-Men. I've done an episode on the recent Netflix show, Nobody Wants This, about a Reform rabbi who dates a non-Jew. I've done lots and lots of expositions on film and how they portray Jews. But I also am I'm an intellectual. By nature, I read a lot of books, and I think about deep philosophy, and that's the type of things that I gravitate towards. And so I also found it to be really fascinating, this whole cultural movement of what at one point was labeled the intellectual dark web, all of these countercultural speakers who sometimes tended right of center, but what they were really doing was they were trying to bring back ancient stories and ancient ideas. And I thought, well, there's something interesting to riff off of here, because they in many ways are similar to Jewish ideas, and in some very important ways they differ a lot. And I thought, well, if people are already interested in this stuff, and if thousands of people are going to hear Jordan Peterson lecture about the Bible, he's basically talking about Torah stories. So let's start that as the basis of a discussion, and then we can decide whether or not we agree with his analysis.
Yeah, that's I feel like, if I may, I don't want to lower your status, but I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in that sense. There's much of my childhood was spent looking and, being with friends, watching movies, TV shows. There's endless hours of content in my head as well, and I was also very keen on the countercultural side that came up in the intellectual dark web. I spent a long time watching those atheist debates with William Lane Craig, and then when Jordan Peterson came to the stage, Stan Harris, That's a very big part of my life. Um, I This project of yours is really it's something that can really bring a lot of people together in our shared experience, and I think it's so worthwhile. Personally, for me, I'll put it out there. My favorite show to philosophize on with Jewish sources is Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's like one of my absolute favorite shows. If you want to do a video on that, that's great. That would be
Great. Point me in the direction of the best episode, and send me your thoughts, and we'll go for it.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, but that's really just, we all share this common culture, right? And what you're doing is you're giving us an avenue through which to perceive it that can make what some may perceive as a waste of time rather sacred instead. And so the question I have for you is, how do you determine which elements of contemporary culture are enriching and which might undermine a Torah-centered life?
Wow, that's a great question. So there's this idea from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who says in Das Tunos, how would you translate it? The knowing heart, whatever you would call it. No, Das Tunos. Who knows? The knowledge of understanding, I guess, if that's what you want to translate it as. And he says that everything in the universe is there to reveal this underlying cosmic unity of God. That's what everything is here to do. Now, in the most obvious way, when you do something good and that connects lots of other people, you're revealing a little bit of that unity in the world. But conversely, a person who does something really debased and low will also be part of that story, but in a way that when they're exposed for their falsehood and their evil, then that's also an addition to the revealing of the greater unity. In other words, the recognition and the undoing of evil is also part of a revelation of unity. So when I look at pop culture, you can look at it from one of two ways. You can say there's something really enriching about the story of X-Men because it represents, I think this was baked in. I'm not reading into this. Like, X-Men was a story about Jews. Magneto is a Jew, and the fact that he's a Holocaust survivor plays a major role in the storyline. Now, he takes it in the wrong direction because his lesson that he learns from the Holocaust is, well, you can never trust people to be nice to a minority when they feel threatened. But the other X-Men have the opposite reaction, and they say, well, look, maybe they'll accept us. Maybe if we show them that we're good for society and we have the greater interest in mind, then maybe they'll see us not as a threat. So you can look at something like that and say, that's amazing. There's something to be learned from that. How can we as Jews learn from the X-Men? But on the other hand, there are parts of society where you absolutely realize that there's almost nothing redeeming about it. And the way in which to riff off of that is to just show how irredeemable it is. What a poor message that it's sending. So, in that example, when you go back and you look at a lot of the Woody Allen movies, they're funny, but they leave a generation with a taste in their mouth that Jews are unbelievably neurotic and have serious libido problems, and why would we ever want that guy to be the token Jew? There's no way that's a good look. So my answer to you is it's everywhere. Everything is a potential learning experience. The question is, how do you separate which ones leave you feeling inspired and enriched and which ones do not? I have a personal ethos when it comes to watching popular media today. I grew up with this stuff, but every now and then I dabble in what's new and what's current. And I try not to expose myself to something that does not leave me feeling more inspired about humanity. That's pretty much my only criterion for wanting to see something is because life imitates art, and we're really holding up a mirror to ourselves. And you can either hold up a mirror to the worst parts of humanity and say, "Oh, look how awful!" Like, I've never watched these what was that show, Succession, right? This show about how this family just destroys each other from the inside out because of jealousy and greed. And it's like, why do I want to watch that? That doesn't give me a good feeling about other people. So why would I waste my time doing that? Rather, let's see something like, a good Aaron Sorkin movie or something like that, where even the bad guys end up becoming good guys. And then you're like, okay, people are inherently, fundamentally good. Maybe not everybody displays it all the time, but and I'm not saying to be naive either. Like, there are evil people in the world, but we tend to. There's this saying, show me who your 5 friends are, and I'll show you who you are. It's like, the more time you spend around people, whether real or imagined, the more you're going to pick up their habits and their and their outlook on life.
Thank you for putting that so simply and truthfully, and really just hitting the nail on the head with that question. I often find myself trying to find the common thread of what makes me want to come back to a show. And I think what you said about being inspired is that thing, right? Like, right now, there's a new show, Adolescence. Everyone is obsessed with this show. And to me, I watched it and I came away horrified. And I'm like, why do you, just because of the cinematic quality of it, you find it so impressive? It's a show that doesn't make you, it takes away the innocence of even children, in that show. Like, I don't want to come back to that. I actually stopped watching at a certain point because, like, what was the reason to watch it? Why would I want to watch a show that makes makes my paradigm of life more depressing than it needs to be? And we need to sort of keep each other inspired, right? Like, that's the unity we want to be a part of. We need to keep each other pushing forward, because there's so much material out there nowadays that's telling you to not continue pushing forward. It's just telling you to, be a certain way and accept things as they are. And in my estimation, Judaism is very much about pushing forward and retaining hope even when it's very difficult. So thank you for giving me that reflection for myself. It was really a great way to put it. Okay, so as much as I love talking about the TV shows and the movies, you have another side to the mensch sense, and the other side is your analysis of the countercultural figures such as Jordan Peterson. I think particularly, we spoke briefly off camera about how you actually spoke at one of Jordan Peterson's organization. I'm not really sure what to call it, but that organization has a conference called ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and you actually spoke at that conference, which was really, really special to see that they were giving a Jewish person a stage in which to speak and share a message. So you engage with Jordan Peterson's content, and you have this video called Jordan Peterson Revealed a Kabbalistic Secret. And it's where Jordan Peterson is talking about God as lacking one thing, and the one thing that God lacks is imperfection. So in the creation of the world, in the ever-expanding history of our universe, we sort of build towards a perfection in some way, if I understand correctly. From that, you build your own case for growth as an ongoing, evolving process, and you echo, I think this is an idea that I've seen present in Rav Kook, in his in his Mora Hador. Is that the right name? I don't remember the name of Nevuche Hador. That's the name of the sefer. Could you briefly outline what you mean by dynamic perfection, by growth as a process of perfection, and how Peterson's framework informs that concept?
Sure. It's one of my favorite ideas ever, because it's probably the best answer that I've ever heard to why do we exist at all. In other words, we're presented with a problem, which is that God is perfection. He is lacking nothing. And then the next question is, okay, so then why do we exist? Because whether or not you want to look at the universe as a part of God or a piece of God or an emanation of God, regardless, we don't have to be here. God, in and of himself, was completely fine, completely whole, as he is described. And we know that the universe had a beginning. And so there had to be some existence before the universe existed where we were not. So at what point did God say, there's something missing here? Well, that's a paradox. It's a contradiction to God being perfect. There is nothing missing. So several people have put forth this idea, Rav Kook being probably the most well-known, is that the answer to that question is that you're right. God, for all intents and purposes, lacks nothing. He's missing nothing, except that when you think about God before time and space, there's nothing dynamic at all. In other words, everything is static. Ani Hashem lo shanisi. I'm God, I don't change. So from a particular perspective, there is nothing that ever moves in the realm of God, because movement necessitates progress or growth or becoming, and the only things that grow and become are things that are imperfect and lacking. So if you think of God pre-universe, it was completely still, perfect, a perfection, a perfect diamond that just does not change. Well, then what's the problem with that? The problem with that is, how do you demonstrate that there is godliness not just in absolute stillness and perfection, but also there is godliness to be found in imperfection, in growth, in movement, in change, in a process and a journey. And in order to reveal that, in order for that to play itself out, you need time and space. You can only go in a journey in the dimensions of time or space. That's where we grow, that's where we move. You're walking to the top of the mountaintop, or you are discovering yourself throughout time. Either way, you are becoming. This is the great experiment of life. The great experiment of life, if you want to put it really succinctly, it's the beauty of a story. It's the beauty of any story you've ever read, where you see somebody begins with a flaw, they begin with a lack, they begin imperfect, but throughout the story you become so invested in the beauty of their becoming more whole that you look back on the beginning of the story and you said, that was vital to the ending. You could not have that beautiful ending without that imperfect beginning. The best place we see this is in the Haggadah, where the rabbis of the Mishnah specifically say, you begin with disgrace and you end with praise. That's how you create a story. And it comes to reveal that the disgrace itself was part of the journey. And what we're doing, this whole experiment called existence, is redeeming the disgrace, redeeming the imperfection, to show that you could not have had that overwhelmingly powerful ending without the imperfection itself. And that's essentially what Jordan Peterson says that he heard from a Kabbalistic source. He doesn't say which source that was, but he says, what does a perfect God lack? He lacks limitation. He lacks finitude. He lacks imperfection. And so I just riffed on that. I said, he's absolutely right. It's a genuine Kabbalistic idea. And in my mind, it is the most redeeming idea of why we're here. Now, I've gotten feedback from that of people saying, are you kidding me? All the tragedy, all the death and destruction, everything that comes along with existence is just there to tell a story. It's just there for the aha moment at the end. And my answer to that is, can you think of a more noble pursuit? Can you think of something more objectively worthwhile than art, than the beauty of a story? Because I can't. You know, what do you want to accomplish in your life? You want to build a building? You think God can't build a building? You want to make money. Even I don't know, like giving tzedakah, like giving charity. You think God can't do that? He can't feed the poor? So everything that you think is the most worthwhile goal that you could imagine in your life, it's like you'll get to the end of your life and you'll be like, well, God could have done all that in far less time and in a much better way. The only reason why he wants us to do it is because we're down here in space and time with our fragile, mortal bodies and trying to live out this life. And at the end of the life, you realize, wow, you just went on a journey. You just changed yourself. There is nothing more beautiful than that. That's why I think we're here. And that's why I made that video.
I don't have a beard, but like as you were speaking, I was like mentally stroking my beard and just like contemplation of what you were saying. It's so beautiful. I have a Substack, and I was trying to write a piece on how to approach the theodicy and the problem of existence, and like I came across so many answers, so many ways of looking at it, and like Rav Kook's approach, this approach of the telling the story approach, is just so. Of course, I don't think that it can never justify in our mind the problem of evil, and I I admit that the problem of evil will always bother me, and I don't think there'll ever be an answer to it in my mind. But I think that if anything can make suffering worthwhile, it is that knowledge that it's part of something greater. The story that even the victims can tell, like even the victims are a very important part of the story, and we think of the imposers of the atrocity, and it's just it's a really interesting and dynamic way of looking at the history of the world, at the seeming chaos that all these sort of threads will connect to some tapestry, and it's the only thing that comes close to that which we cannot describe in the problem of evil. And I think that it's such a you put it so simply and in such a great way. So thank you. I think it's worth spreading. So, this idea of a story, right? A story is not static by definition. A story has, like you said, like the Chachamim said, it begins with tragedy and it ends in hope. It begins with a flaw and it ends in amend. So, how might an observance from the philosophical to the pragmatic, how might an observant Jewish community integrate this mindset and encourage members to see mitzvah observance and Torah study not as static achievements, right? I finished the Masechet of Talmud, I finished a Mishnah, I finished the Tanakh. How do we see this not as a fixed endpoint, but as ever evolving practices that shape our story?
Wow. I think we have a lot of that built in already. I think so much of the messaging, just for example, we're right now in the middle of the Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, where so much of the act itself is the process of counting. It's the journey that we spend so much time focusing on. And of course, there is a destination. We're getting somewhere. We're going to reach a pinnacle. But we revel in the process. So much of what we do. And I also think that even within the yeshiva system itself, in the best cases, the act of what's called learning Torah lishma, learning Torah for its own sake, is maybe the greatest restatement of that principle, which is we're not here to pass a test. We're not here for the glory. We're not here so that we can become the rabbi of the community. We're here because we enjoy the act of learning. As we say every morning in the bracha over the Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, we're saying, God, you've given us the mitzvah, not of knowing Torah, not of having the information, but being occupied with the learning of Torah. So I think that you don't have to look very far to see how much that permeates our culture, However, I would also suggest that there are ways of reminding ourselves that we're in the middle of the journey. One of the best ways I think we can do that is using art, using story. And interestingly enough, I think we can do that best by using music, because music itself is actually a celebration of the journey of time. Music is a rare phenomenon whereby you're in the middle of the song, and you know that you're in the middle of the song because you've hit that minor note that you know will resolve itself in just one or two notes from now, and there will be this huge climax and huge payoff that wouldn't have existed had you not hit that sad, bitter note in the middle. And so we love to sing. Singing, I think, is actually an incredible demonstration of emunah, of faith, that, hold on a second, my life feels bitter and sad right now. That's just the sad note that precedes the major one that makes the song so powerful. And I think that's why the Jews sang right after they left Egypt, is because they said, oh, now I see the whole story. Now I recognize what all those middle notes were for. And now I can put the whole picture together, and I can sing the whole song. So I think there's a lot of practices that we can look to that exist either codified in Jewish law to be able to remember that everything's a journey, everything is a practice, we're never finished. And at the same time, I think we can look to art and music as ways of reminding us that that's true in our own lives.
Yeah, there's something which all of us, I think, share in an appreciation and the ability to be touched by music and art and stories in our way. It's a very, very good way to integrate it. And we have plenty of, I don't know, but me going into a Carl Bach minyan on like a Friday night is always very special. The music, it touches me, and it activates something in me. It sort of like goes from one spiritual moment to another, and it gives you that bridge to take you from one spiritual act to the next. So this has been a really interesting conversation. I think that I saw everything that you speak about in Mensch sense, and that is present in your work. I kind of the Weltanschauung, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but the worldview which makes it up has been present in everything that you've spoken about. And so that's sort of the goal of the Philosophical Jew podcast. I want to showcase multiple philosophies for life. And what I like to do in order to sort of make that manifest is end these conversations with a shift from the philosophical and abstract to the pragmatic and the concrete. So we've spoken about movies and TV shows, and how through the stories within them, they often give us what to think about, and they've often given me what to think about when navigating the complexity of life. So what advice would you give to the modern observant Jew who will undoubtedly be exposed to many forms of media dealing with different types of issues, from X-Men 97 to Nobody Wants This? How should they approach the vast landscape of media available to them? I think we've already touched on this, but how can they view their story in life as part of this dynamic perfection for which the world was created? How can we set that in our hearts?
For those who feel like they want to be enriched by the media that surrounds them, I would say, like many very potent tools, use them sparingly and be very selective about which things you expose yourselves to. Now, I won't say this as a blanket statement because I know that there's some people out there who it just kind of washes over them. They'll watch the bloodiest horror movie and just go about their day. I'm a very sensitive person, so the media that I expose myself to has a deep impact on me. Now that can be a very positive thing, because if I'm very moved by something, that is taking me in the right direction, then that's a tool. That's a tool. Everything in life is a tool. It's there to help us, or not, or otherwise, or to hurt us. So if I can recognize what the tool of media is, then I know which things I'm meant to expose myself to. As I mentioned to you before, my personal criterion is whatever is going to give me greater hope for humanity, I'm into it. Also, with other criteria as well, that it's not too vulgar or inappropriate, that it is kind of damaging to my spiritual well-being. And the other thing I would also mention is you have to remember what it's for. I know a lot of people just feel burnt out at the end of the day, and they just want to use media as a way to just distract themselves and to relax. I would advise against using media as a type of escapism. First of all, it's very short-lived. Second of all, and I tell this to my kids all the time, when they're like, please, can we watch something? Can we watch? I was like, what do you think kids did 100 years ago when there was no television? You think they were so burnt out that they couldn't do anything else? They found something to do. I don't know. They went out into the yard and picked up a stick or whatever. Like, it's okay. Be bored. Boredom is also an acceptable thing to live with in your life. And oftentimes in my own life, I've found that my most creative moments come out of boredom. I'm sitting there. This happened often when I was in class in high school or college, and your mind just starts, the hum of your teacher just zones out, and your mind you start doodling and you start coming up with stuff because your brain needs something to keep it occupied. Unfortunately, we have climatized ourselves to immediately jumping to a passive form of busying ourselves, of passing the time, by looking at media outside of ourselves, rather than saying, okay, if I'm bored, well, let me find a way to entertain myself. And usually that becomes a very creative endeavor. So this is what I would say. Yeah, I find that there are good uses for media, and some things are definitely stick to me in my memory as some of the best examples, some of the best stories, some of the best benchmarks that help me to orient myself towards where I want to go. But I use it very sparingly because I would rather spend more of my time working and developing my own movie of life than watching somebody else's.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I want to give our audience a little exclusive on your, if I can call it that. It's probably not an exclusive, but I want to give them a little exclusive on your ARC appearance at the Jordan Peterson conference. You've shared many wonderful thoughts today, and I thought a little fun way to end would be for you to tell us how you ended up at the ARC conference. I think you were supposed to blow the shofar, if I'm not mistaken, you told me. And there's a whole story about it.
So I'm good friends with an individual who was in charge of coordinating the musical parts of the first ARC conference, which took place in 2023. And I'm one of the few rabbis that he knows. And he said, do you know anybody who can blow a shofar? We're looking for somebody. We have somebody who can blow a Greek horn and a Roman horn, but we want to round that off with the other great ancient civilization that has contributed to Western society, and that's the Jewish civilization. So we'd like somebody to blow a Jewish horn, which is a shofar. So I said, great, I'm your guy. I'll be happy to do it. Little did he know that I actually had no idea how to blow a shofar at that time. So I found myself a teacher. I spent the next month and a half blowing it every single day. I didn't do such a bad job on the day itself. But as these things would turn out, once I accepted the opportunity, the organizer of the conference got in touch with me and said we were scheduled to have a very prominent Israeli Jewish speaker for the conference, but lo and behold, the ARC conference ended up being about 3 weeks after October 7th, and so this speaker was unable to attend. And now we don't have any Jewish representation for speakers. Would you be able to say a brief something about the Jewish contribution to Western civilization for about 5 minutes. So I said, I'm happy to speak in front of 2,000 people and Jordan Peterson. You know, whatever the challenges that audience presents, I guarantee you it's an easier audience than 50 Jewish university students that I normally speak in front of. There's no question. This is like a step down in terms of the intimidation. So I got up there and I spoke about what I thought was one of the most important Jewish contributions to Western civilization, which is the very concept of progress. As we've been speaking about, the concept that history is one long story that has a beginning, middle, and an end. But prior to the Jewish civilization, most of humanity understood history as cyclical, as something that never changes, as something that sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down, depending on the astrological sign or whatever God is in power at that particular moment. But the concept of monotheism, which we don't have fully time to develop right now, the concept of monotheism is what leads to the idea that history is one long story that has a beginning and a middle and an end, that we're all moving towards something. And we see that as a microcosm, as a macrocosm of our own lives, and we see that throughout all of human history, that we're getting somewhere, such that today it's almost hard to think of seeing life as not involving progress and movement. And so that was the idea that I shared at ARC.
Well, I'm so touched that you shared it with us as well, and it's really nice that ARC had, a platform for a Jewish voice, and I think they couldn't have picked a better voice at the moment. And really, everything that you shared today was so profound. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for everything you do at Mensch Sense. I think it's a very worthwhile project, and for all the avenues through which you put out Jewish and Menschlichkeit ideas. And really, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
The pleasure was all mine, and I'm wishing you a lot of success. I think we need to do more work getting out what I consider to be the most sophisticated philosophical ideas, which are to be found in the Torah. So the more we speak about them, the more we should be seen as contenders, right up there with Marcus Aurelius and Kant and Nietzsche. We got to spend more time studying the Jewish philosophers.
I could not agree more. That's the epitome of what this podcast is made for.